Today, we're looking at a green ink by Herbin Vert Pre. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. There's timestamps down below so that you can skip around, but if you got the time, I would appreciate you if you check out the entire video. You can follow me over on Instagram, and if you're new here and like fountain pen ink reviews, I would remind you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Viscosity Van Gogh with a medium nib, used it to write for a day and to take my notes for this video. I used 3 papers to standardize in some of my writing samples: Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. There are additional writing samples that'll come later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it came in a vial like this. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X 450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X 750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is quite a bit lighter than this stub with no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer some shading, thankfully, for being such a light ink. 9 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer shading in the writing. 17 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both shows color variation, and we got it. Tomoe River. With no bleeding, almost no ghosting at all. It's that light a color. The 1.1 has no feather spread, it has halo, no sheen, it has shade. The halo and the shade come together like on the Herbin. The Ben at the end has halo and shading, much darker than the ER in the middle that don't have as much halo or shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, only a couple spots of shading, but they do show up. 12 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen. Again, a couple little spots of shading show up. 25 seconds to dry. Scrubby for both shows a little bit of color variation left to right, and we do get it in the paper, or in the writing. And Rhodia, with no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no real shading. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, some nice shading in this writing. 10 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone, maybe a hair lighter than the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, a couple spots of shading throughout this writing. 19 seconds to dry for it to be that light. Scrubby for both shows color variation, and we get it in the writing. I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see at first is this very bright yellow at the bottom that's pushed up. And then what looks like a green line, but it is not a green line. If you look at the very, very top of it, what you actually see is a very light blue across the top. That blue is a mix of the yellow and blue. It's not its own dye. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it in the water. And it ultimately looks the same. I'm not expecting any resistance, but what I do notice here is that little bit of blue across the top, much harder to see on this one than it was on the first one. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page and how hard it may be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, there's a lot of blowout that's occurring in the lowercase h. That would stop me from using it in a note-taking situation, and how light this particular ink is. Now, water is lifting all the blues off and leaving the yellows that we saw. That's the reason that it's just basically so light. It's not completely removing it from the page with only 30 seconds. Now, the pen flush is completely removing it from the paper. It's all that you should need. However, all that I needed was water. The 1/3 bleach solution, of course, completely removes it from the paper. I test viscosity or flow by using a tilt test that I've linked in this video. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Herbin Vert Pre has a viscosity of 1.61, making this a very wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples, and for the inks I've tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Herbin Vert Pre has an average dry time of 15 seconds, so despite it being very wet, its dry time is normal. Instead of finding inks that look like Herbin Vert Pre, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I went for a nice purple and chose the Atramentis Purple Violet. The second writing sample is done on yellow Rhodia and white lines paper. Here we're looking at yellow Rhodia paper, and that's because since most of this ink is really made of the yellow, I was curious if we get any kind of tone change for having a yellow backdrop. And we don't. It looks like perhaps it's a little bit lighter in the extra fine. The medium is just as light and hard to read as it was originally. The extra fine does look slightly lighter. The stub looks basically unaffected. Not that you would use this in a professional environment, I just thought it would be funny if it disappeared. White lines paper with no bleeding. Very minor aspects of ghosting here, but nothing really. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. The extra fine is a little bit lighter than the stub. With no feather spread, halo sheen, there's spots of shading that are occurring. 4 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen. You look at the word fox, the word brown, you can see that it does have some shading. 7 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both do show us a little bit of color variation left to right, and we do get some in the writing. And that's all that I have for writing samples. So what do I think of Herbin Vert Pre? Yes, this green does shade quite a bit and very well, but it's incredibly light, and as it gets towards darker, it's kind of neon. So I find that it's much too bright an ink to regularly use on the page. So what nib and pen are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? This ink can very easily come off as far too light and look like you're writing with a highlighter. I found that the only way I got an ink that was really usable was using a broad wet pen. Still very bright, but at least I could read what was there without hurting my eyes. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.